When we look back at the vast, complex history of Starfleet, names like James T. Kirk and Jean-Luc Picard stand as titans of the franchise. They are the heroes who define generations of science fiction. But there is one name that arguably holds more weight than all of them combined. A man who did not just command a starship, but who was instrumental in building the very Federation that everyone else swore to protect. That man is Captain Jonathan Archer. For the diehard fans, Archer is the greatest explorer of the 22nd century, the pioneer who took humanity out of the nursery and into the deep end of the galaxy. However, despite his monumental importance to the lore, Jonathan Archer remains a figure shrouded in frustration and mystery. Star Trek fans did not meet him until the show Star Trek Enterprise first broadcast in 2001. A full 35 years after the original series aired. Because the show suffered from a premature cancellation and a highly controversial finale that focused more on characters from the next generation than the Enterprise crew, Archer's true fate was left hanging in the balance. We saw him give a speech, and then the screen went black. For years, casual viewers assumed his story simply ended there, but that is far from the truth. If you know where to look, hidden in freeze-frame biographies on computer screens, buried in the dark twists of the Mirror Universe episodes, and revealed in interviews with the show's creators, a shocking and incredible life story emerges. We are talking about a timeline that sees Archer rise from a disgraced captain to the president of the Unified Federation of Planets, and a dark, alternate ending involving time travel that was never filmed. In this video, we are going to bypass the cancellation and the bad reviews to uncover the true timeline of Captain Archer. We will explore the hidden details of his post-captaincy life, the massive wars he fought after the camera stopped rolling, and the heartbreaking final destiny of the man who started it all. This is the complete, untold story of what really happened to Jonathan Archer. To truly understand what happened to Jonathan Archer, we first have to understand the strange world he was born into. When Star Trek Enterprise launched in 2001, the franchise was suffering from a serious case of fatigue. Viewers had spent over a decade with the highly polished, philosophical, and nearly perfect officers of the 24th century. Captain Picard and Captain Sisko were diplomats and warriors who operated with the safety net of a massive federation and advanced technology. Jonathan Archer was nothing like them, and that was exactly the problem for many fans at the time. Archer was not a statesman, he was a test pilot. He was the son of the engine's designer, a man with a chip on his shoulder and a deep distrust of Vulcans. When he took command of the Enterprise, NX-01, he was effectively flying a prototype that was barely held together. This was a captain who could not just beam his way out of trouble or raise shields that could withstand a supernova. He was vulnerable, he was often angry, and he made mistakes that would have had Picard court-martialed. This raw, unpolished nature made the show controversial. Fans felt like the franchise was taking a step backward, giving them a captain who seemed to be stumbling in the dark rather than leading the way. However, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that this struggle was the most important part of his legacy. Archer had to be flawed because he was writing the rulebook as he went along. There was no prime directive to guide him, no Federation Council to call for backup, and no established protocols for first contact. Every time he met a new species, specifically the Klingons or the Andorians, he was literally making history. He was the first captain to bring his pet beagle, Porthos, on diplomatic missions, a detail that seems trivial, but highlighted just how informal and human Starfleet really was in those early days. By the end of the show's 4 seasons, the very things that fans initially criticized became the reasons they loved him. We realized we were not watching a standard captain, we were watching the birth of the Starfleet ethos. But just as the audience began to accept Archer as a vital historical figure, the galaxy decided to throw something at him that would strip away his innocence forever. The transition from wide-eyed explorer to a hardened military commander was about to begin, and it started with a single, devastating attack on Earth. In the first 2 years of his command, Jonathan Archer was an optimist. He believed that if you approached the universe with an open hand, it would shake it. But that worldview was shattered in an instant when an alien probe attacked Earth, carving a trench of destruction from Florida to Venezuela and killing 7 million people. This was the moment everything changed for the Enterprise crew. The mission was no longer about exploration or science. It was about survival. Archer was tasked with entering the Delphic expanse to find the Xindi, a coalition of species determined to wipe humanity out of existence based on a lie told to them by trans-dimensional beings. This season-long arc through the show's 3rd year is where we see the most dramatic evolution in Archer's character. The man who once agonizingly debated the ethics of interfering with pre-warp civilizations was now forced to make impossible choices. In one of the most shocking moments of the entire series, Archer was forced to strand an innocent alien ship in deep space by stealing their warp coil, effectively sentencing them to a slow death, just to ensure Enterprise could complete its mission. This was not the clean, moral superiority we were used to seeing from Captain Picard. This was a desperate man doing whatever was necessary to prevent the extinction of his species. By the time Archer reached the Xindi Council, he had evolved into a formidable strategist. He did not just blow up the weapon, he engaged in high-stakes diplomacy. He had to convince the Xindi that humanity would not pose a threat to them 400 years in the future, dismantling the lies of the sphere builders who were manipulating the timeline. This victory was twofold. First, he saved Earth from total destruction, but perhaps more importantly, he proved that enemies could be turned into allies through dialogue and shared truth. This grueling experience in the Expanse is what truly prepared Archer for his future role. He learned that peace is not something that just happens. It is something you have to fight for, bleed for, and sometimes compromise your own soul to achieve. By the time Archer reached home, the temporal Cold War was apparently resolved, and Archer was no longer just a captain. He was a hero who had looked into the abyss and returned. This newfound grit would be essential for his next massive challenge, uniting the fractured species of the Alpha Quadrant into a single alliance. But before we get to his presidency, we need to look at a strange source that gave us the most concrete details about his life, the mirror universe. Strangely enough, the most concrete details we have about Captain Archer's future do not come from the main timeline, nor do they come from a sequel series. They come from the 4th season's 2-part episode titled In a Mirror Darkly. This was a massive treat for fans, taking place entirely in the mirror universe, a dark, twisted reflection of our reality where the Federation is replaced by the brutal Terran Empire. In this timeline, the counterparts of our heroes are vicious, ambitious, and cruel. But the writers used a brilliant plot device to smuggle in the real history of Jonathan Archer for those paying close attention. The plot revolved around the discovery of the USS Defiant, a Starfleet ship from the original Star Trek series era that had traveled back in time and crossed over into the mirror universe. Because this ship came from the future of the Prime universe, its computer database contained a complete historical record of the Federation, records that the mirror version of Archer was desperate to access. When he hijacked the Defiant to seize control of the Terran Empire, he pulled up his own personnel file to see how his counterpart fared in the other timeline. The screen was only visible for a few moments, but for fans who hit pause, it was a goldmine of information. The biography on the screen revealed a level of success that drove the Mirror Archer into a jealous rage. It confirmed that the Prime Jonathan Archer commanded the Enterprise NX-01 for a total of 10 years, from the year 2151 to 2161. This is a crucial detail because it confirms that Archer remained in command right up until the signing of the Federation Charter. He did not quit, he was not killed in action, and he did not lose his ship. He finished the mission.
Mirror Sato, reading from the file, tells him that his name is among the most recognized in the Federation and that historians have labeled him the greatest explorer of the 22nd century. The irony here is palpable. The evil version of Archer believes that great men are not peacemakers, great men are conquerors. He sees his counterpart's legacy of diplomacy and exploration as weak, yet he is haunted by the fact that the weak Archer achieved a lasting glory that the strong Mirror Archer never could. This freeze-frame biography also gave us the roadmap for his life after the Enterprise. It listed him not just as a retired captain, but as a future ambassador and president. It was a clever way for the writers to tell us that, despite the show ending, Archer's story was only just beginning. He was about to trade the captain's chair for the council chamber, a transition that would define the next 30 years of his life.
According to the records, Jonathan Archer's time aboard the Enterprise officially ended in the year 2161, shortly after he played a major role in signing the United Federation of Planets Charter. While many captains struggle to adjust to life without a starship, Archer's unique experience made him the perfect candidate for a new kind of battlefield: politics. The galaxy was still a fragile place. The coalition of planets, humans, Vulcans, Andorians, and Tellarites, was brand new, and old rivalries threatened to tear it apart before it even really began. Who better to keep the peace than the man who brought them all together? In 2169, 8 years after leaving the Enterprise, Archer was appointed as the Federation ambassador to Andoria. This appointment was deeply symbolic. Early in his career, Archer had a tense and often hostile relationship with the Andorians, specifically with Commander Shran. But over the years, he had earned their trust more than any other human. In fact, the biography screens indicate that 5 years prior to becoming ambassador, he had been made an honorary member of the Andorian Imperial Guard. This is a massive honor, rarely bestowed upon outsiders, and it speaks volumes about the level of respect he commanded. He served as ambassador for 6 years, cementing the bond between Earth and one of its most important yet volatile allies. Following his success on Andoria, Archer returned to Earth to take up a position on the Federation Council in 2175. He served as a councilman for 8 years, helping to shape the laws and policies that would govern the Alliance for centuries to come. But his rise did not stop there. In the year 2184, Jonathan Archer achieved the highest office in the land. He was elected president of the United Federation of Planets. For 8 years, from 2184 to 2192, the former test pilot led the entire Federation. It is difficult to overstate how significant this is. We are used to seeing admirals giving orders, but Archer was the head of state for dozens of worlds. He guided the Federation through its infancy, ensuring that the ideals of exploration and cooperation became permanent fixtures of the government. By the time he finished his term, the Federation was no longer a shaky experiment. It was a galactic superpower. However, while this political rise is a matter of public record, there is a darker chapter of Archer's life that was planned but never filmed. A twist involving time travel that would have rewritten everything we thought we knew about the show's villain.
While Archer's public life was filled with accolades and presidencies, there was almost a secret destiny that would have painted him as a tragic villain. Throughout the first 3 seasons of Enterprise, viewers were teased with a subplot known as the Temporal Cold War. A mysterious, shadowy figure, credited only as Future Guy, was seen giving orders to the Suliban Cabal from the distant future. He manipulated events, ordered attacks, and seemed to be playing a 4-dimensional chess game with the timeline. The identity of this figure was one of the show's biggest mysteries, and when the series was canceled, the answer was left unresolved on screen. However, Years later, the truth finally came out, and it changes everything about how we view the captain. In 2012, series co-creator Brannon Braga dropped a bombshell on Twitter and in subsequent interviews. He confirmed that if the show had continued into a 5th season, the identity of Future Guy would have been revealed as none other than Jonathan Archer himself. That is right. The villain manipulating the timeline, the man who had been tormenting the crew and causing chaos, was actually an older, desperate version of Archer, communicating from the future. The implications of this are absolutely staggering. It suggests a timeline where something went horribly wrong. Perhaps the Federation collapsed, or the Romulans won a decisive victory, forcing an elderly Archer to break the Temporal Prime Directive. He was not trying to destroy the past, he was trying to fix it. He was manipulating his younger self to make different choices, to toughen him up, and to steer history away from a catastrophe that only he knew was coming. It turns the entire show into a closed time loop where Archer is both the hero and the antagonist of his own story. This twist would have added a layer of darkness and complexity that Star Trek rarely touches. It paints Archer not just as a clean-cut hero, but as a man willing to become a monster to save the future. While this storyline was never filmed, knowing that this was the writer's intent adds a haunting subtext to his character. It suggests that the burden of leadership weighed so heavily on him that it followed him literally until the end of time. But even without this dark future, Archer's legacy in the Prime timeline continued to ripple outward, influencing events and people hundreds of years after his death.
Even long after his presidency, the name Jonathan Archer continued to echo through the corridors of Starfleet, popping up in the most unexpected places. Subsequent iterations of Star Trek have made a point of name-checking him, effectively cementing his status as a legend. One of the most famous and slightly hilarious references comes from the alternate reality known as the Kelvin timeline in the 2009 Star Trek movie. When James T. Kirk meets Montgomery Scott on a frozen outpost, the engineer explains that he was exiled there as punishment for a transporter experiment gone wrong. Specifically, Scotty admits he tried to beam Admiral Archer's prized beagle from one planet to another, and the poor dog never reappeared. While this is played for laughs, it confirms a few key things. First, in that timeline, Archer lived long enough to become an admiral and was still active, or at least influential enough to have a prized pet in the mid-23rd century. Second, it shows that his love for beagles, a defining trait of his character on Enterprise, remained with him throughout his entire life. It is a small detail, but it bridges the gap between the two eras perfectly. In the Prime universe, the references are far more reverent. In the first season of Star Trek Discovery, set a decade before Kirk's 5-year mission, Archer is listed on a display screen as one of Starfleet's most decorated captains. His name appears alongside other titans of history like Matthew Decker, Robert April, and Christopher Pike. This was a deliberate move by the showrunners to integrate Enterprise firmly into the canon. For a long time, some fans treated Enterprise as the stepchild of the franchise, but Discovery made it clear, you cannot have Starfleet without Jonathan Archer. This sentiment continued in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Captain Pike explicitly references Archer when dealing with time travel and meeting officers from the future, referring to the "those old scientists" era, a play on the acronym TOS, or the original series. By placing Archer on this pedestal, the franchise retroactively fixed the initial rejection he faced. He is no longer the controversial prequel captain. To the characters we love like Pike and Spock, he is the George Washington of space travel. He is the standard they aspire to. But like all legends, his story had to have an ending, and the writers gave him one that was both poetic and heartbreakingly perfect.
After completing his term as president in 2192, Jonathan Archer did not simply fade away into obscurity. He returned to his roots. The man who started as a pilot and became a politician ended his career back in uniform. According to the biographical data, Archer was appointed to the role of Chief of Staff at Starfleet Command, holding the rank of Admiral. It was a fitting final post for a man who had effectively built the organization from the ground up. He spent his final working years overseeing the fleet he had once dreamed of, watching it grow from a handful of experimental ships into a vast armada protecting the quadrant. Eventually, Archer retired to upstate New York, close to where he was born. He lived a long life, even by 22nd century standards, passing away in the year 2245 at the age of 133. But the writers of Enterprise left one final poetic detail in his death date that serves as the perfect goodbye to his character. The biography screens reveal that Archer died exactly 1 day after the christening of the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701. This was not a coincidence. It was a deliberate narrative choice to symbolize the passing of the torch. The very ship that James T. Kirk would command, the ship that would become the icon of the franchise, was launched into service the day before Archer took his last breath. It implies that Archer held on just long enough to see the next generation begin. He saw the legacy of his original NX-01 continue in a new Constitution-class vessel. The era of the Founding Father ended precisely as the era of the Golden Age began. There is something deeply moving about this timeline. It suggests that Archer died knowing his life's work was secure. He had taken humanity from a terrified species huddled on Earth, afraid of the Vulcans and the Klingons, to a galactic power capable of launching the Constitution-class starships. He did not just explore the stars, he paved the road so that others could follow. His death was not an end, but a transition. The spirit of exploration that he fought so hard to instill in Starfleet had found a new home in the hull of Kirk's Enterprise. When we step back and look at the entire tapestry of Star Trek, Jonathan Archer stands out as a singular figure. He was not the philosopher that Picard was, nor the cowboy diplomat that Kirk would become. He was something far more raw and real. He was the test subject. Archer was the man who had to figure it all out the hard way, making mistakes, breaking rules, and forging alliances in a galaxy that was hostile to humanity's presence. He carried the weight of an entire species on his shoulders, transitioning from an angry pilot to the president of the United Federation of Planets. His story is a reminder that the clean, utopian future of the 24th century did not appear out of thin air. It was built on the back of a man who was willing to get his hands dirty. He faced down the Xindi, navigated the treacherous politics of the founding species, and established the moral compass that every subsequent captain would follow. While his show may have ended too soon, his legacy is undeniable. Without Jonathan Archer, there is no Federation. Without the NX-01, there is no NCC 1701. He was, in every sense of the word, the father of the final frontier. So the next time you watch the original series or the next generation, remember that the peace and prosperity they enjoy is the direct result of Archer's struggle. He was the bridge between our present and their future, the essential link that makes the entire Star Trek universe possible. He may have started as a controversial figure, but history has proven that he was exactly the captain we needed. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the untold history of Star Trek and want to see more videos uncovering the secrets of your favorite shows and celebrities, make sure to hit that like button. And do not forget to subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We have plenty more untold stories and hidden biographies coming your way, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.